Hello, and welcome back to Gunfighter Life. As always, I am your host, Michael Milito. Today we're going to be talking about pushing yourself and practicing the things you don't normally practice. We're also going to talk about bonding with a gun because, well, there's no rules in podcasting. We can cover two topics if that's what we're going to do. So, as always, an intro about myself. One of the reasons I started the podcast. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That's first and foremost in everything that I do. This podcast is no different. Come at it from a Christian perspective and a Christian worldview. You certainly don't have to be a Christian to listen to this podcast, but I don't apologize for being a Christian, and I don't hide that. As far as this podcast goes and gunfighting goes, I started shooting at a very early age. Started competition shooting at a very early age while I was still in school. My first formal competition in 1998. And I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I did several combat tours in Iraq, where by God's grace I made it back in one piece, mentally and physically, when a lot of other good men did not. Not because I'm better than them, but because God loved me and chose to bring me back home safely. After my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. And after that, I went to work for LAPD. I worked some different assignments. I worked some of the nastiest streets in LA, and by that measured some of the nastiest streets in the country. Carrying a gun, and again, God brought me through that safely and without incident. And after that, I also did time in the Army, both full-time and Army Reserve National Guard. So did those things, primary MOS of infantry in both the Marine Corps and the Army. And let's see, what else? Did a lot of hunting. I've hunted everything from gray squirrels on the East Coast to prairie dogs on the West Coast, white-tailed deer on the East Coast, and mule deer and elk on the West Coast, and everything in between. Been very blessed on a lot of different things. Also been very blessed in shooting competitions. I've competed in rifle, pistol, shotgun, 3-gun, steel challenge, IDPA, all that stuff. Precision, small bore, all manner of things, even muzzle loading and primitive weapons to hatchet throwing, archery, competed in all that stuff. Been very blessed to win quite a few competitions. And my full-time job now, I'm the commander of a tactical team. I won't say any more about that because this podcast is no way affiliated with my job. But I am a full-time gunfighter, and that's my bread and butter, and I'm coming at this from that perspective, and we all have our favorites and our biases, and I'm no different. But something that I bring to the table is that I come at this from a lot of different first-hand experience instead of just opinions and thoughts formed on YouTube and Facebook, and nothing wrong with those platforms, but I come at this from a real-world perspective and from actual experience, and I hope to share that experience with you. So let's get started in today's topic. So this week and the last couple weeks I've been doing some training, and we got some new guys starting out, and they're going through a third-party vendor for some firearms training. And last week I did some of my own training, training some of the guys. And something about formal training, you should never rely on other people. You should get the training on your own and push yourself. But some of the benefits of training with other people and formulating a curriculum for other people, both of those things, is that you train things you don't normally train. Like, it's good when you go to the gym to have a practice regimen. Sometimes it's good to go to a different gym that has different machines, and you may find a new exercise because you can't do the ones you normally do. You may stumble upon a new exercise that you really like, that you're like, wow, I can do this even at my other gym. Same thing in shooting. Same thing goes with gunfighting. You may learn from somebody else a technique like I said, I started my first formal competition in 1998. I've had training from, anything from the Marine Corps to the FBI to LAPD, all kinds of different places. Big private organizations, all manner of training. And I still get techniques and see things that I've never seen before. And if it works, hey, adopt it. So that's something you'll get when you're training with a group of people you've never trained with before. And just trying things that you don't normally try. Like, I have a practice regimen that I normally do when I go to my normal range and shoot my normal practice. I start out with the fundamentals, slow fire practice. Then I do what I would call rapid fire at a certain distance. at a certain amount of time, getting a certain number of hits. These are what I call my standards. And it doesn't really matter what those standards are because they're probably going to be different for you. And then I do some fast draw, fast speed things as fast as I possibly can. And I have a standard at the minimum amount of time that I accept in those, that I try to exceed that, obviously. And then I go into some other skills. Shooting on the move is probably an every other time thing. Moving from one position shooting, moving to another position and shooting is probably an every other time thing if I don't have time to do it. But training with other people really helps us identify things we don't normally train. Like this week, obviously when I go out and train, I train strong hand, my dominant shooting position. They also train strong hand shooting with one hand and weak hand shooting with one hand. But what I don't normally train is shooting with both hands for my weak hand. That's not something I normally do, but it can come in very handy if you're shooting around a barricade or standing guard on a barricade for a long period of time, where you're covering around a corner. If you're right-handed, you're around the left side of a barricade, left side of a wall, and you're there for quite a long amount of time. You might want both those hands on the gun, and you might want to shoot left-handed or weak side because, you don't want to expose most of your body. So that's a skill that you wouldn't normally get unless... That's a skill that I don't normally train, but I train with another group of guys this week, and I train that, and that's great. Another thing I trained just tonight was watching all the different flashlight techniques that people use, and I realized that I should train with those more. Not just a flashlight technique that I normally train with, that I'm comfortable with. What happens if I have to shoot with my other hand and I have to have the flashlight in the opposite hand? For whatever reason, I'm wounded. I can't manipulate the gun with my strong hand, but I can still hold the flashlight, so I've got it in my weak hand. Just things you don't normally train or don't normally think of, pushing you outside your comfort zone. Maybe it's as simple as looking up a qualification that you've never shot. There's a ton of different police qualifications. Maybe try shooting a different one every once in a while. It's good to have a standard one. Like the standard go-to for me is the FBI qual. I'm an FBI certified firearms instructor. Shooting the FBI qual just to have a standard of measurement, making sure that I'm progressing and doing good, and all my techniques are solid and all that. But picking a different qual, looking at a different police agency's qual. For example, LAPD qual has multiple targets. Maybe you don't practice your target transitions as much as you should. Maybe that makes you practice a box drill, 2 to the chest, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, 1 to the head on 2 different targets, as fast as you can. Maybe that's a skill you need to practice because that's a thing you might run into in real life. So it's good to have standards, and it's good to have things that you always practice and try to progress in, but it's always good to be familiar with things and learn new skills. Because you don't know how a gunfight's going to go. If you did, you would avoid it altogether. If you knew you were going to get in a gunfight at this place at this time, unless you're a psychopath, then you would avoid that place in time. You don't get to pick how the gunfight's going to go because you're the good guy, hopefully, if you're listening to this. You don't get to dictate how the gunfight goes down. So you don't know what skills you're going to have to use in that time in that place. So you should have a wide array of skills. And even when something new's presented itself, you've done so many different things. You're like, yeah, the fundamentals are the same. I can do this. I can shoot two-handed with my opposite hand. It's something I don't normally practice, but I can do it. Because you're so used to trying different and new things, you don't freak out when you have to do something that's unusual. Another thing I realized this week that I didn't practice enough of, that I haven't practiced in a long time, is I'm right-handed. I carry my holster, either my duty holster or my concealed carry holster, whichever one I'm at work or not at work, whichever kind of holster I have. What if my dominant hand is injured? Grabbing that gun and unholstering it with your weak hand. So pulling my gun out of the holster with my weak hand. So that's something to practice. There's a couple different techniques you can look up. It doesn't really do well to describe that in audio. But, can I get my holster off my right hip, my gun out of my holster with my left hand? That's something you should know and practice and figure out a way to do it, because you don't want that to happen in a gunfight. Your right hand is injured and you can't use it, or, somebody's got your right hand pinned and you need to get your gun out with your left hand. Can you do that? You can if you know the right technique. So figure that out. Practice that. Not all the time. It's not something you have to... That's not a skill I don't advocate you practice all the time, because unless you have all the time every day to be out at the range, which even I don't have that, then you probably don't have time to practice these skills every single time. But that's something you could practice, once or twice a year. It's been years since I've practiced that, and I practiced it a few times, and way more comfortable with it this week than I was last week because I just did a couple of reps on it. Now, you should always have your bread and butter drills, and they should always be the fundamentals. What you go to all the time, your fundamentals, your ragged hole drill, your bullseye drill. I was talking about my standards. My standard when I go out to the range is with my handgun standing, unsupported. I have a steel plate that's about the size of a head. It's a round steel plate, and it's out. My standard is 50 yards, 10 in a row. I don't let myself practice anything else until I meet that standard. That way I know my fundamentals are good before I move on to anything else. If your fundamentals are crap and you're practicing some other skill, you're just going to reinforce crap fundamentals. So make sure your fundamentals are sound. But once you get that skill, maybe you want to try not just getting all your hits, practicing those fundamentals. Next, get those hits from the draw. Draw out and get those slow fire hits. Then next, try it with your strong hand. Try it with your weak hand. Another one of the fundamentals you should always practice is your draw. So every time you go out, your draw is to, at this distance, whatever that distance X and time amount Y, get so many hits in a row. And if you mess up, then start again. If you're messing something up, take a deep breath, reevaluate, figure out why you're missing. You're pulling shots to the right, you're pulling shots to the left, you're pulling shots high, you're dropping shots, whatever that is. You diagnose that and you meet that standard. But once you've done that, maybe you try something else. Maybe you try your draw with your hands above your head because you're having to surrender, or you're having to put your hands above your head. You practice a draw like that, or you practice turning around so you're facing away from the target, and then you draw in a certain amount of time and do the draw like that. Practice things you don't normally practice. Like I said, you don't know what skills you're going to need. Alright, so I think we've hammered on that a little bit. Now let's talk about bonding. Bonding with a gun. Sound a little weird, but really getting to bond with a gun. And there's a couple of different ways to have a special gun, and this is just one of them. Like, one way would be like, I have a old double-barrel 12-gauge shotgun side by side that was passed down from my grandfather, and I love that old gun. And that's not something, unless I had to feed my family, that I would ever sell. Like, if somebody's life depended on it, yeah, of course I would sell it to feed them or whatever. But other than that gun is getting passed down. It's a very special gun to me. But I'm talking about bonding with a gun through training and through life experience. Whether that be, I have guns that I've taken deer and elk and wolf and all manner of things, and I have notches in the stock of my one old youth model 243. I have much nicer, higher caliber rifles, but my go-to rifle when I go hunting is that 243 youth model. It's light. I can hike it up and down the mountains all day. If I get in close enough and I know my shot placement is good, I can take anything in North America with that 243. It's a great gun, and it's put many amount of meat in the freezer. I have a bond with that gun. And I have plenty of money to buy a much nicer gun. I think I bought that gun, bolt action Remington 700, at Walmart on sale for like $300 and something. Because at the time I didn't have a ton of money. And you know what? Even though I have much nicer guns, but that's still my go-to hunting rifle. You know why? Because it works, and I have a bond with it. I think today in American society, we have this, just because we can get something new, we think that that's somehow going to make us better, or that's what we need. And that's a lot of marketing and a lot of culture, but that's not always the case. I have my duty gun. I have two duty guns. When I have a gun that I depend my life on all the time and I train with all the time, I try and have two of them that are, if not identical, very similar. And I have two STI, 2011 double stack 1911s. Very nice guns, and I've bonded with both those guns. I've ran them through training. People say 1911 is not dependable. That gun, I've had plenty of Glocks and plenty of other guns. Those guns have less malfunctions than just about anything else, provided I halfway pay attention to them. But those guns just run. And I've run them through so many training courses and passed so many quals with them and run them through their paces and shot so many drills with them that I've really bonded with them. Like, I could go out and buy a double stack Nighthawk custom, and I've thought about it, that, is a little bit nicer and the edges are a little bit better and the fit and finish is a little bit better. And an STI is a nice gun. I mean, they're $2,000-$3,000 guns, but, a Nighthawk custom is a $4,000 or $5,000 gun for the one that I would want. But I've bonded with those guns, and there's a time and a place for upgrades. Like, one of my STIs, they have slightly different rear sights, and I like the one rear sight better than the other. So I'll probably put that same sight on both guns because I've run them enough, and that rear sight isn't bad, but I know the other one works for me better. So I'll probably replace that. There's a time and a place to upgrade. But when you bond with a gun, you really bond with a gun. It's granted it's a tool, it's an inanimate object, but you have that bond with it. You have that, and what that does is gives you confidence. So that you have that confidence. Now, we're not robots, but you are confident when you draw that gun at a certain distance, you know that in a certain amount of time you can get a certain number of hits because you know that gun. You know that gun, you've trained with that gun. I know what duty load that gun is zeroed for at what distance. I know, what the point of aim, point of impact difference is at 7 yards and 15 yards and 25 yards and 50 yards and 75 yards and 82 yards with that gun. Like, I pick it up and I see that target and I know where I have to aim on it. And that's something you don't get if you buy a different gun every week. And I'm not against gun collecting. I used to collect a lot of guns. And I've kind of whittled my collection down over the years because if I don't shoot it, I'd rather take that time and that money and put it into something that I'm training with. I'm not telling you to do that, but I'm saying nothing wrong with having a bunch of guns, but having a gun that you really bond with means more than having 10 guns that you just bought and took to the range once or twice. Because that's not a gunfighter, that's a gun owner. And this is not the gun collector podcast, this is the gunfighter podcast. This is gunfighter life. And having that confidence when you pick that gun up, you've dropped that gun so many times and you've picked it up and it's been fine, and assuming you don't see any broken sights or anything, that gun can handle it. Like I said, you know what ammo it likes. You know where it shoots. You know exactly when you pick it up. If your hand's in the wrong place, you know it right away and you fix it on the draw because when you grab that gun, it's like your hand is going home. When you put your finger on that trigger, if it's even a millimeter off, you're like, whoa, fix that. Because you know. And if you have I like to shoot all kinds of different guns when I go to the range, especially to train with different guns, especially guns with horrible triggers. Sorry, Glock shooters, but I have a Glock, that I keep for training just because the trigger is so bad. That if I can shoot that gun well, you can pretty much shoot any gun good well. I have long double action revolvers for just that reason. But having those guns that you bond with, that that when you pick it up, if something's not right, Like, when you pick it up, if the magazine is loaded or halfway loaded or empty, when you pick it up by the weight of it. That's what I mean by bonding with a gun. Something that I do when I bond with my guns, I'm not telling you to do this, it doesn't really add anything. They're inanimate objects, but I name them. Like, I don't name every gun that I have, but I have a couple of guns that I've named, and that's their name, and I bond with those guns. And I think that's something that's missing if you just buy the new gun and shoot it for a little bit and then trade it off or upgrade it. And like I said, there's a time and a place for upgrades. When you get something that works for you, stick with it until there's a reason to upgrade. Don't just keep changing the sights, keep changing the trigger and popping this spring in and popping that spring out. Like, does it work? Yeah, can you not reach the slide release with a good technique? Then you probably should get a longer slide release. That's fine. But once that's done, then stick with it and train with it. Are you really good at mag changes and really good at mag changes and really good at mag changes and you practice all the time and you want to get to the point where you can do it without looking at the mag well? Then yeah, throw a mag well on it, throw a mag funnel on there. And there's time and a place for upgrades. But knowing that gun and bonding with that gun is far better than getting a new gun all the time that you have no relationship with. And if you're a gunfighter, if you're good at the fundamentals, you can pick up any gun and shoot it well. Like, my day-to-day carry revolver, my day-to-day concealed carry gun that I pocket carry, or my backup gun is a .357 Magnum, Smith & Wesson J-frame that I've had for a long time, and long double action trigger. And my duty gun is an STI 2011 with a beautiful trigger and beautiful sights. Night and day different between those two guns. I can shoot them both well because I've mastered the fundamentals, and you should strive to do that too. And I bonded with both those guns, and I wouldn't trade either one of those for a slightly fancier gun that I hadn't bonded with, especially if I didn't have the time to train with it. Let me ask you this question. You're going into a gunfight. With, you can pick two guys. You can pick a guy that gets this old beat-up police trade-in Beretta 92 that has almost no bluing left on it. It's beat to crap. The sights are good, the trigger's fine, but it looks horrible. There's nothing fancy about it. But that guy goes to the range with that gun because that's all he can afford, and he spends all his money on training and ammo, and he practices with that gun, thousands of rounds a month. He practices with that gun. He practices a double action, single action. He practices it on the draw. He practices, with his hands up, hands down. He practices shooting laying on the ground. He practices the crap out of that gun. And then you have another guy that he goes out and shoots every once in a while, and every month he goes out with a different gun, and he's got the brand new Army sidearm, whatever it is, the M17, super fancy, whatever the thing is, right? He's got that brand new gun. Let's even say he shot it once. He took it out and he put 50 rounds through it. And tomorrow you can't avoid it, and you're going to get in a gunfight. You can pick one of those two guys to go with you. Which guy do you pick? You pick the guy with the old beat-up Beretta that knows exactly where it shoots because he shoots it all the time. Because he's bonded with that gun. And if you honestly answer that question, you realize that time and that bonding with that gun is more important than the gun itself. And that's all that I'm saying. And hopefully that made you think a little bit, and hopefully, sharing this knowledge and everything that I've been blessed with makes you a better shooter and a better gunfighter, and I hope that you never need it in the real world, in a real situation, but hopefully if you do, you live to fight another day. Thanks. Have a blessed day.